Next week, lawmakers will convene in Santa Fe for a 30-day budget session, but that doesn't mean other issues won't be on the table. Lawmakers are expected to debate ethics and transparency, public safety, and other issues. Now, is 30 days enough time to approve legislation that addresses contentious issues and a new budget? I'm joined at the table tonight by Tom Garrity with the Garrity Group PR. Independent journalist Rob Nicoleski is here. He's one of our regulars. Laura Sanchez-Reve, an attorney with Cuddy & McCarthy LLP, and Harry Van Buren, professor at the UNM Anderson School of Management. And Thomas, not much was accomplished in the last 60-day session. We had to have a special, in fact. But let me start where I set up this thing with ethics and transparency. We've got some bills being proposed already for some tougher ethics things, but the governor has to certainly put them on her call. Is it your sense that she's going to be willing to do those kinds of things given what the public's looking for right now?
Well, you know, there's nothing legally that says she has to put this on.
True.
I mean, obviously she would want to, and given the issues that, the side issues that we've discussed around this table before involving, the governor over the winter time, and then the more serious and legitimate issues with two former treasurers in jail, Secretary of State, former Secretary of State in jail, I think there's a natural reason to put this on the call. And I think that there's a larger reason too, in that New Mexico residents right now have not only been declining in trust of state government officials, but their level of distrust has been increasing at a very rapid rate. Wow. And this is according to our Garrity Perception Survey over the last 5 years. The highest levels of distrust in Albuquerque as well as Las Cruces. So, we have the two major population centers where we're seeing increased distrust. Ethics legislation could very well help to rebuild some of that trust.
Do you agree with that? Would ethics legislation right out of the gate for the governor and everybody concerned, frankly,
well, I think
be a good thing?
If they actually pass something, it would be a good thing.
Even better?
They've been doing this for at least since 2006. There's been something proposed, and it doesn't get any traction.
Yeah.
I think this is one, I agree that she could really, do a lot for herself and her own public image and the Republicans in the state if she took some leadership on this issue. But we haven't seen that in the past, and so I don't know if this is the year where that's going to happen.
Is there any downside, Rob, for the governor coming out strong on this? Because it seems to me if she came out really, really strong, that would be received very well by the public.
I think so.
Yeah.
And on Wednesday, Associated Press reported that Governor Martinez had decided that she was going to at least put one thing on the call, would have legislators disclose outside sources of income. So that's a step in the right direction. New Mexico is one of just 8 states that doesn't have an independent ethics commission. Right. I don't know. Let's say I'm just skeptical. Sure. Just because you pass a law doesn't mean that suddenly our politicians are going to be really good or ethical. And in the 42 other states, there's plenty of examples. But I think that the tide has turned, especially in this past year, in sort of a bipartisan way that people point fingers at both parties.
That's right. Harry Van Buren, if the governor doesn't do it, Democrats are going to do it, certainly.
Right.
You know what I mean? And they already are starting to do it. There was a press conference in front of the Secretary of State's office last week talking about the need for this kind of thing. So who's in the driver's seat on this, it seems?
It's really hard to say, and it feels like this, once again, is becoming a highly political issue. So you've got Senator Egloff wanting to audit the governor's special law fund. You've got the governor wanting to have legislators do things like report outside income.
Right.
But nobody's really talking about the big issues, which would be things like an ethics commission, like ethics training. So when I teach my executive MBA students, they often give them a choice of a project. And I've had a number of students who work for state agencies do projects for things like ethics training and codes of conduct. So there's really a huge need in the state for an ethics infrastructure. So it's not a guarantee of ethical conduct, as Rob pointed out, but it certainly can't hurt. And it really is important to think about the ways that we talk about ethics across state government, not just in the governor's office, not just in the legislature, but also in the agencies.
They do have ethics training, and I've sat in on some of these meetings where you have brand new legislators.
Right. They'll
sit in there, and it's like a half a day session where they go over ethics. So it's not like it doesn't exist at all right now.
That's right.
But maybe it's just a question of how much teeth it's got.
But also, Laura, we have an election year. Does this change things? I say again, it has to be in everybody's best interest to be on the side of ethics, it would seem to me, on an election year. Is this helpful?
I think so. I think that's a huge part of what I think what the incentives will be for people to work together maybe and have something actually productive come out of this. But I think you started the segment as saying, in a 30-day session, can you actually pass anything? And I'm cynical, having watched the legislature for years now and participated in the process. They could actually pass something, but they have to get started, when they start, not 2 weeks in after they've done all the pomp and circumstance and the parties and everything else. And I don't think the public realizes how much of that there is at the very beginning. There really isn't a lot of legislation moving until about the second or third week, even in a 30-day session. So we're talking about really 2 weeks at the end of the session when they do actual real work on a day-to-day basis.
And sometimes less than that even too.
Sometimes it's, and so a lot of it gets just sort of, pushed to the very end, and so you end up in these situations where stuff doesn't happen. And I think a lot of that is just, the way it's developed over years, but I think, coming in and actually having a plan to start on day one or day two, hit the ground running, they actually could get a lot done, I think.
It's a good kumbaya moment. Everybody could hold hands together and say, we're getting after this, the whole thing. But it is a budget session, Tom Garrity, and we've got some clarity now about a little more clarity, I should say, about how much money we're going to have to be working with here. And how is it, in your mind, how is this going to impact decision-making in Santa Fe now that we're getting a little bit closer to what we don't have financially?
Over the last couple of weeks, both the governor as well as the legislative have shown basically what their hand is with respect to the budget process. And there are certain areas where everyone tends to agree as far as education, tourism, Medicaid. Of course, the big difference is in the judiciary and funding of the attorneys and such. But when it really comes down to it is what money is there.
Right.
And the last projection was back in December, and already we have probably close to 150 pre-filed bills, all dealing with some type of financial piece to get a part of that projection. And seeing what is happening in the copper industry, seeing what's happening in the oil industry. I think John Arthur Smith is going to have a field day to rattle the troops to say, what, the surplus is not a surplus, and they're going to have to take a closer look at that.
That's right. There's going to be a lot of positioning on this. It's already started. A lot of wording coming out of John Arthur Smith and others already saying, look, we may be anywhere from 80 to 130 million less than what that December projection is, and that affects attitudes. But it's saying that going in, Laura Sanchez, is it designed to pull people back a little bit before the thing even starts, saying, look, don't get your hopes up, folks. This is really not going to be happening.
I think it is managing expectations. And I think that the administration has sort of the opposite approach. I think we saw Tom Clifford of DFA basically saying, talking about a more bullish economy.
Right.
And John Arthur Smith talking about a bearish economy. And so they obviously have a very different perspective on, what it will look like once the numbers come in. But ultimately, I think what we've seen from Senator John Arthur Smith is definitely being much more conservative in terms of estimates and trying to be deliberate about what you're actually going to fund and have contingencies about other things instead of just putting everything in one pot.
That's right. And also, Rob Nikolesky, it's about priorities, certainly, when you have short money. And then there's the race to sort of elevate what's the priority compared to somebody else's priority. That's where the scrum starts to happen when there's short money. It's interesting, isn't it?
You can have lots of priorities, but in many ways, oil's driving this bus. Every time a $1 decrease in the price of the barrel of oil roughly is equivalent to a $10 million loss to the state general fund. And we're talking right now, this week, of oil at touching $30 a barrel. Yeah. And so the timing is not good. And the special session starts on Tuesday, or not the special session, the legislative session, the 30-day session starts on Tuesday. You can talk about all you want about priorities, but if the money's not there, and they originally were talking about $252 million in new money. That new money might be gone money.
Exactly. Follow up on that if you will, because that's a real deal right there. What Rob just said, That's a reality these people have to deal with. It's just so managing expectations, as Laura said, on our side of the deal, on the public side.
Yeah, there really are just not a lot of degrees of freedom. Even if oil was at $50 a barrel, we'd be having a very different conversation. And Rob's point that there may be no new money available, or even what if there is a slight cut from where we were last year, then the conversation really changes. Then a lot of the things like pay raises, broad-based pay raises for state workers and folks at universities really go by the wayside.
I like how you slipped that in there, folks at universities. Very good, very good.
Personal self-interest here.
Well done. Another thing, just a minute left on this, Tom, I'm going to swing the table here a little bit. We have another bill. This has happened before. The idea to pay our legislators, to have full-time legislators, and the idea is to pay the median salary here in New Mexico, about 45 grand, somewhere around there. Who wins and loses in that scenario? Does the public win? That's the bottom line question for me. Does the public come off better in New Mexico with a full-time legislature?
I think so. I mean, I think you just have to pay legislators, whether it will fly, because it has a very long road to go. It has to go through a House Joint Memorial, has to get through the governor, has to pass through the voters. I think in concept it's very good because we need to be able to pay legislators. What the work that they're doing up there, and it is work, even in the interims, is a lot of heavy lifting, and we need to be able to compensate all elected officials along those lines.
This is always a fundamental question too, do better candidates show up if there's pay, or do worse candidates show up if there's pay? Do you know what I mean? Because in some states that have full-time legislatures, they're almost like mini Congresses. Right. That's what they're doing. They're actually using that situation to run for Congress later. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I've had experience in the California legislature working there. I've had experience working in the Arizona legislature. At the time, California was paid, Arizona was not paid. And then, of course, New Mexico, I think, we all know it's not been paid. But I do think that the type of, two things, pay and term limits means that there are changes to the people who come in. So you end up getting a lot more fresh blood that comes in.
Right.
And I think in this case, if we're talking about just paying them, you end up being able to open up the opportunity for people to run who would otherwise not be able to. Like, not very many people in this state can just put their lives on hold for 30 or 60 days, not to mention the interim committees that they have to attend, and put their livelihoods on hold in order to do that. And that's why you have so many attorneys who end up being legislators, because
or retired people.
Or retired folks. People who can basically put their work on hold for a while they do this other stuff and then come back to it. That's very unusual and something that I think would hopefully open it up so more people can actually run.
I know we're really short on time, but my thought about this is this. There is no way in a 30-day session you're going to get a bill like this passed. But it's a discussion worth having.
Sure.
I think maybe a compromise would be, instead of paying each individual legislator $45,000, which is going to give heartburn to a lot of voters, how about if you pay a staff member, and the money goes straight to the staff member, and not just one staff member for each legislator. Right. We've got a lot of them. How about one staff member who handles 2 or 3 legislators?
Okay.
Handles their phone calls, returns their phone calls, handles their email. Maybe that would eliminate some of that harm.
We're going to wrap. I love that idea because you're actually creating more professionals that way.
Exactly.
It's a beautiful thing. There's a pipeline you're feeding on the front end that works out really good for us at the back end. Now, this year, we are focusing on ethics, accountability, and transparency in state government as part of our People, Power, and Democracy project. That's a partnership with KUNM, New Mexico In Depth, and the New Mexico Newsport at UNM. Now, up next, we hear what some local leaders are doing to support young people who want to pursue degrees and careers in the STEM field.